Chapter 5, Sea of Fat Mexicans. It didn't take long for the investigation into the murder attempt on Wiener Kellerstein's life to lead the police to some interesting information about the plot's intended victim. Investigators seized some 40 weapons from his farm, including shotguns, 15 hunting knives, Chinese bayonets, antique swords, and a rocket launcher. At 50, Wiener Kellerstein was headed back into custody, but the loners weren't the only people who were going to miss him. Some of his neighbors complained to the press that, with Wiener and his weapons out of commission, thefts in the area were going up. Unlike Wiener, Boxer Musketeer was more interested in brotherhood than weapons or ambition, and others in the club generally found him likable, solid and passionate in a non-psychotic way. In December 1999, Boxer Musketeer gave an interview to Katie McCrindle of the Chatham Daily News. At the time, Boxer was trying to keep the police at bay by handing them cards bearing portions of the Charter of Rights and Freedom. He also tried to allay local concerns after the loners bought a hall in the tiny southwestern Ontario hamlet of Electric under the improbable name of the Universal Life Church. Boxer truthfully told McCrindle that he was a hard-working forklift driver, not an international drug baron. "I'm not Al Capone. I've been working in a Tilbury factory for 20 years. Boxer also told the reporter that he was in the loners for camaraderie, loyalty, and honor. With no apparent trace of irony, Boxer continued, "We're loners. We get along with everybody." The Angels' push into Ontario was unrelenting. On April 12, 2001, they set up a prospect chapter in London, Ontario, in Boxer and Wiener's neighborhood under the guidance of George's Boo Boy Bulu of the rich, aggressive Sherbrooke chapter. The Angels' Ontario officers' minutes showed they had hopes of setting up more chapters in Pickering, Gulf, Sudbury, and Hamilton in the near future. In the face of the Angels' expansion, stasis didn't seem an option for Boxer's loners. There was growth and there was decay and death, with precious little safe ground in the middle. It was as though all the clubs were like sharks, and the only way to stay alive was to keep moving. The Angels pressured the loners to drop the word Ontario from the backs of their vests, which the loners took as a slap in the face, a taunt that the loners were nothing more than a regional club in Ontario. The loners responded with more courage than foresight. They had had loose contact with the Banditos since December 1999, when American Banditos sent a Christmas card up to the club. On Tuesday, May 22, 2001, Boxer, Wiener, and a dozen other members of the Loners Richmond Hill and Woodbridge chapters agreed to become probationary Banditos. It was bold and perhaps foolish, and the Banditos blithely accepted Kellerstein, even though the Outlaws and Hells Angels wouldn't consider letting him into their ranks. The Banditos' immediately priority was numbers, not quality, and the Angels were bigger and getting bigger, while the Banditos were scrambling to stay on the map in Canada. The move meant Jimmy Rosso was losing his brotherhood and one of his former members, who assumed Rosso would be joining his old brothers from the Loners and the Banditos, trying to console him in an email sent on May 24th. His comments echoed the optimistic views of many, including Boxer. "I suppose perhaps maybe you're going through a little bit of a mourning period, which would be understandable. The thing is though, we didn't change the biking world. It changed all around us. It was either get with the times or sink like a rusted out vessel. We now not only have those numbers we always have had with strength and loyalty and ties, but now we have a multitude of new brothers. The Banditos Motorcycle Club are good solid brothers who really believe in the ideology and concept of brotherhood." A few days later, Boxer's Club marked the move to the Banditos with a party at the Loners Clubhouse on James Street in Toronto. The clubhouse was close to the street, and it was hard not to think how vulnerable it was should the Angels in Ontario feel the kind of urge clubmates so often felt in Quebec. Boxer and Pepe Barrio, president of the Loners Woodbridge chapter, welcomed Canadian Banditos president Alan Brunette, Robert Tautout, Ledger, and the Canadian secretary, or El Secretario, Sylvain Sly Gregorio. the Banditos webmaster, the club had no grandiose Spanish name for this post and others. That day, Burnett particularly enjoyed his meeting with Woody, the 800-pound African lion who was the loner's mascot. Woody's original owner, Guarino Woody Sirianni of Woodbridge, had liked to say that he would rather live a day as a lion than 1,000 as a lamb. After Sirianni's death in a motorcycle accident, Woody was adopted by the club as a living, breathing, sometimes growling reminder of that credo. Dejectedly pacing his 25-meter by 25-meter chain link pen, however, Woody might just as well have stood for some of the more troubling ironies of the biker life. As menacing as he was, Woody was anything but free. For his part, Boxer was nothing less than giddy. On June 18th, he left a jubilant message on his new club's webpage. On our first ride together as brothers, it was great. We will make a mark in history together. Only we can appreciate the freedom of riding in the wind. Ride free forever. On the other side of the great divide of the biker world, the Angels didn't have a pet lion, but they were organized, and they were well informed. The club put together a file containing the names of 614 people who had been connected to the Rock Machine and Banditos in Quebec and Ontario. The dossier contained a wealth of information: names, dates of birth, addresses, license plate numbers, social insurance numbers, driver's license identifications, addresses of wives and mistresses, favorite haunts, physical descriptions, photos, and their status in the club. Disseminated as a CD-ROM, the file also contained information on more than a dozen businesses friendly with the Banditos in Ontario and Quebec, in addition to others in the criminal underworld, including the Outlaws motorcycle gang and the Sicilian Mafia. It was a Michelin guide of sorts for hitmen working for the Angels. With their decision to move into the Banditos camp, Boxer and his friends joined the list of potential targets. The Angels would have to update their records. Not long after he found the disc, Gregor was shot to death in his Montreal car dealership, Automobiles Sans Tracas, which translates into Automobiles Without Trouble. His murder came just 8 months after the Banditos' previous webmaster, Real Tintin de Bank. In the biker world, as in mainstream business, information was power, making the post of webmaster a dangerous one. 2 months after the Jane Street party, Chopper Raposo, Pepe Berea, and 4 other former loners rolled up to the annual Sturgis bike rally in the Black Hills of South Dakota, near Mount Rushmore, and just a few kilometers from the town of Deadwood, where frontier lawman Wild Bill Hickrock was gunned down in 1876 while playing poker. As usual, during the biker rally, the town of Sturgis, population just over 6,000, swelled to more than 500,000 people, most of them leather-clad. What interested the carload of Canadians most was the sight of 500 or 600 members of the Banditos decked out in full colors. When they returned to Toronto, Berea reported to Boxer and the others in the club that he was duly impressed by the Banditos' presence. "I've never seen so many fat Mexicans in my life," he told his biker associates in his Italian accent. It was a sea of fat Mexicans. Tao Leger had thought of joining them on their pilgrimage to South Dakota. Shortly before the bikers headed south, he changed his mind, deciding instead to honor his bail conditions, which barred him from leaving Canada or associating with criminals. And so he went with his family for a quiet holiday at his cottage in St. Catharine in Hadley in East Warren Township. Ironically, his decision to obey the law made him an easy target for a crew of Angels hitmen. The Ontario Banditos would later hear that when their new friend Tao saw the Angels murder squad coming, he stepped in front of his wife and children, shielding them from the gunfire. Outlaw bikers often belong to clubs with gleefully satanic names and imagery, but generally, when one of their numbers dies, they gather quietly in churches, get down on their knees, and pray to the same God as everyone else. Many outlaw bikers like Frank Lenti consider themselves good Christians, though they take a decidedly Old Testament view of the theology. At Tao's funeral, the body was dressed in a suit, his Banditos colors folded neatly beside him in the casket. Boxer Musketeer Crash Kokrakis and Chopper Raposo attended Tao's funeral, and the chapter sent a wreath of flowers ordered from a shop in Verdun. Bandito's secretary, Ronway Atkinson, was mortified to hear that the florist had made up the wreath in red and white, the colors of the Hells Angels. It was either a bad joke or a monumental gaffe by the florist. Whatever the case, the red and white flowers only made a bad situation worse. The bloodshed and danger didn't scare Boxer away from his new club and brothers. If anything, it only served to make him more fiercely loyal, as if they were now bound together by spilled blood. Though Boxer had worn the fat Mexican on his back since May, he truly became a bandito at that moment. He had Banditos Worldwide tattooed across his belly, along with the sketch of a Harley-Davidson motorcycle and a fat Mexican. On his vest, he had 3 patches over his heart: Banditos, our colors, don't run, and just good old boys. Quebec was a danger zone for Boxer now, and he rode directly into the heart of it in full Banditos color. Sometimes soldiering through the rain, Boxer, Berea, and a bandito named Josh rode 1,600 kilometers on the round trip from Chatham to the funeral. His banditos in Ontario were scrambling to establish themselves, at the same time that the Quebec Hells Angels were doing so well financially that Walter Stadnick had set up an incorporated property management firm with computerized accounting systems in 2 apartments, money counting machines, and a heavy-duty safe to launder tens of millions of dollars in drug profits. That day, as Boxer rode to Quebec, with the wind in his face, he felt totally alive. He didn't care that he didn't have drugs or power or a private army like leaders of the Quebec Angels. He did have a loving family, as well as his extended family in the Banditos. The Angels should have scared him, but somehow he felt exhilarated. It was clear that Boxer was head over heels in love with his new life as a bandito. A few months later, when Boxer arrived home on his Harley Fat Boy from a get-together at the Kingston Clubhouse, he again sounded enraptured as he described the 1,100 kilometer round trip. He typed this note on the Banditos Canada website in his typically horrible grammar and spelling. "Yeah, I got caught in the rain, but I had a great ride. You're good company, bro. Flying the colors made the rain dry as soon as it hit me. All you have to do is believe, and I believe in the Bandito Nation. Love, respect, loyalty to all brothers. Be safe till we meet. We are getting stronger." Boxer hugged Frankie Bam Bam Bammer Salerno on Saturday, December 1st, 2001, in the ballroom of the Kingston Travel Lodge, which looked particularly festive, decked out with the Christmas tree and red and yellow balloons, a passable approximation of the club's gold and red colors. The reason for the celebration was the Banditos had just granted 45 full memberships in 4 new Canadian chapters. At the ceremony, Boxer and his Bandito brothers were given their Canada bottom rockers to sew onto their vests, meaning they had become full members of the Banditos Nation in just 6 months, half the usual waiting period. The reason for the accelerated promotions wasn't that they were twice as good as the average candidates for membership. The truth was that the club was getting desperate and badly needed to boost its ranks in the face of the Hells Angels' relentless growth. For Boxer and the rest of the loners, sewing the patches onto their backs meant they were passing a point of no return, publicly aligning themselves against the Hells Angels, the world's most powerful biker club. If they had been content to remain as loners, they could have continued to drink beer and smoke pot and go to bike rallies and pig roasts with no real risk. Now they were taking sides in what threatened to be a war. Boxer and his old loner clubmates didn't dwell on negative things that afternoon. Pepe Berea hoisted a Banditos Canada vest, while National President Alan Burnett savored the moment in a feeding of ribs and seafood. Boxer picked up a full patch for his longtime friend, Wiener Killestein, who, owing to bail stipulations, couldn't associate with known criminals as he awaited trial on new weapons and drugs charges. Like all new members, Killestein was given a personal information form, which included a space to fill in the description of his motorcycle. Club rules called for all members to have a working motorcycle, but Wiener Killestein thumbed his nose at the requirement. In the space, Killestein scribbled that he owned a 1903 single-cylinder 49 cubic centimeter bike with no brakes, no lights, and a dropout lubrication. When Boxer filled out his form, he proudly noted that he was the owner of a Harley Davidson Fat Boy. Despite Celestine's quirks, such as his attempts at humor on the form, Boxer remained loyal to him. But Boxer had also grown close to Frankie Bam Bam Bammer Salerno, who lived in the upscale Toronto suburb of Oakville. Boxer and Bam Bam shared Italian heritage and seemed to understand each other instinctively, as paesani sometimes do. Often they would slip into speaking Italian to each other without seeming to even realize it, each searching for exactly the right word or phrase to express his feelings. Celestine was quick to feel offended or abandoned, but kept any feelings he had about the Boxer Bam Bam relationship to himself. When they joined the Banditos, Wiener, Boxer, Bam Bam, and the other new members were handed the 12-page set of Fat Mexican bylaws. One new requirement was that they were expected to file monthly reports to the mother chapter in Texas, or face fines. Soon, the former loners were sending the Texans messages about parties in Kingston, Toronto, and Montreal with other groups, including the support club, the Killer Bees, whose motto was, "Keep the Hive Alive," and the Palmers, a Montreal organized crime association. 3 days later, Eric the Red McMillan, the sergeant at arms of the newly formed Kingston Banditos, walked out of the strip club in the basement of the Dynasty Inn in Oshawa after last call. That night, McMillan had been called to a meeting with the rival Hells Angels amidst reports that the Toronto Banditos were flexing their muscle in Oshawa and cutting into the Angels' business of running strippers. As Eric the Red stepped out into the parking lot, he was quickly surrounded by 3 Hells Angels. One ran a knife into his stomach, slitting his skin from his chest to his belly. Doctors patched Eric the Red back together, and he recovered amidst media pronouncements that the parking lot bloodletting meant that the Quebec biker war had officially expanded into Ontario. The headlines may have been exaggerated, but the knife that carved up Eric McMillan was a sharp message to Boxer Musketeer and his fellow Ontario Banditos. Party time was over, and survival was anything but guaranteed. The Toronto Banditos were clearly outnumbered and surrounded. The central region of the Hells Angels Canadian Empire included chapters in West Toronto, East Toronto, Downtown Toronto, North Toronto, Thunder Bay, Simcoe, Windsor, Oshawa, Niagara, Kitchener, Keswick, and Woodbridge, as well as the Ottawa-based Nomads. Minutes for a Hells Angels Central Region officers meeting for January 2002 showed that the 1%er clubs in the province were still anxiously watching each other like gaggles of teenagers at a high school dance. One note from the minutes reads, "The Outlaws were invited to the Banditos Christmas party in Tweed. They did not attend." Another states, "The Banditos sat with the Outlaws in the bar at the bike show." The minutes also hinted at tensions anticipated for another motorcycle show scheduled for the next month in London, Ontario. The organizer of the London Motorcycle Show at the Western Fair Progress Building was Larry Pooler of the downtown chapter of the Hells Angels, and the Outlaws apparently planned to crash the event. As Angels Club Minutes stated, Outlaws are having a national run to the London Bike Show on February 1st, 2nd, 3rd. Big squeeze. As the show began on Saturday, February 2nd, 2002, a police officer told Pooler what sounded like alarming news. 30 Banditos and their supporters were on their way to the Progress Building. The police officers seemed to want guidance on how to stave off an ungodly rumble. "Tell them all to buy tickets," Pooler said. Around 3 in the afternoon, about 20 Banditos and their supporters began marching slowly through the Progress Building, past displays of motorcycles and bike parts, all the while glaring at about 40 Hells Angels. The Angels on site weren't people to be trifled with. They included Raymond Ray Akla of the Elite Nomads chapter, Paul Sasquatch Sauce Porter, the Nomads Behemoth president, and Oshawa president Mark Cephas Stephenson. The Banditos badly needed to show they weren't afraid and that they too deserved respect. The Banditos who strutted through the Progress building all wore their black vests with their Canada bottom rockers. Bikers are as territorial as wolves, and the Banditos would scarcely have been more proactive if they had actually urinated on the Hells Angels' turf. London City Police turned out in force, along with Ontario Provincial Police tactical officers, attempting to keep peace while filming the event for future study. Police video caught Boxer Musketeer front and center, grinning and looking a little manic in his new red and gold colors. With his dangling Fu Manchu mustache, he looked like a personification of the Fat Mexican logo, though his black woolen Turk gave him a distinctly Canadian look. Police noted that some of the bikers wore bulletproof vests while others carried knives. As a show of anti-angel solidarity, Banditos publicly hugged outlaws, including Mario the Wop Mike Pereni, their stocky handlebar mustache Canadian president. The Banditos and Outlaws remained separate clubs, but their mutual dislike of the Angels pulled them closer. Ordered off the fairgrounds, Boxer and his fellow Banditos complied, while grumbling like schoolboys that it wasn't fair that the Hells Angels were allowed to stay while they had to go. Not long afterwards, the dance was repeated, with slightly less intensity, as about 30 outlaws made a slow march through the center of the Progress building. When the afternoon was finally over, it didn't feel as though bloodshed had really been avoided. Rather, it had been postponed until a later date.